two appendices. So we
Got
have
it.
two appendices we're looking to get after today. We can we'll get into IEBC today for sure.
Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody to the June 25th IBC IEBC tag meeting where we are working on our existing amendments and significant changes reports. I'm going to give it a couple minutes and see if we can get some more folks trickling in here, and then we'll keep going. And Rosanna, did you mean to stop sharing your screen? It's all right if she didn't. I'll bring up my copy of the agenda. All right. Give me just a couple minutes and we'll wait for some stragglers to get in here, and then we'll take this one off. All right, it looks like we have a quorum in the attendees list here. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with a roll call. Chair Primary Todd Bayreuther. He called and let me know he might have spotty connection today. And we also will not be having Roger Hiringa today. He is out. So after we're done doing roll call, we'll need to select a chair pro tem. Architect Primary Joe Mayo.
Here.
Thank you. Is the alternate Chad Fortaleza?
Here. Thank you.
Thank you. Building Official Primary Tim Woodard. We just got a message from him. He will be late, joining us around 2:30 and out early at 3:30. All righty. For the alternate Building Official, Steve Belzak.
I'm here, Dustin.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody attended the Building Code Council meeting on Friday. We have a new Fire Services Representative Council member, which is Dan Young. He was a member of this tag, but because we already have two council members here, Dan Young will no longer be in the primary seat for Fire Services Representative. So Lance Dahl, you have been promoted to primary on this seat for the moment. And Lance, are you here? I see him here. He's connecting to the audio currently. I will assume that means he's good to go. All right. For cities and counties primary, Hoyt Jeter.
Yeah, I'm here. You see
Thank
me
you.
as Sandy, but that's my wife. So
Gotcha. She shares the same last name. I kind of thought that one was you.
Mm.
Cities and counties alternate Sean Carlstrom. And we have a new tag member for the affordable housing representative position, Todd Sullivan.
I am here.
Thank you, Todd. I'll give you a little bit of room to introduce yourself here after the roll call. Looking for the general contractor or developer primary, Bill Mybush.
Present.
Thank you. For the manufacturer supplier position, we also have a new tag member who can't be here today, Brian Horstman. For the structural engineer primary, Joshua Mergens. For the alternate, Trent Tinney. For a person with disabilities and or accessibility expert, we have Michael Shaw. I believe he won't be able to be with us today. He had a pre-existing engagement. For building owner or property manager, primary, Brett Conway. For the general public, subject matter expert, primary, Michael Barth.
I'm here.
Thank you. For the alternate, Leah Summer.
Present.
Thank you. For state enforcement agency, primary, Paul Clark. I see Paul here in the guest list. I'll count him as here. For fire protection engineer, primary, Andy Leonto.
Present.
Thank you. With that one, we do have a quorum, and we've got some room. So if some folks had to go somewhere, we will maintain quorum minus 1 or 2 folks here.
Dustin,
moving-
Lance Dahl, I was came on a few minutes late.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. For other introductions, I would like to give Todd Sullivan the opportunity to introduce himself to the group.
Oh, thank you. My name's Todd Sullivan. My construction company is Sullivan Homes. We specialize in affordable housing, primarily recycling existing properties, utilizing the purchase of one and building townhomes. So we're creating 3 units out of 1. Utilizing the middle housing laws that have been enacted in the city of Spokane, Washington. We're able to bring townhomes to market at about $250,000 per unit. So it's truly the first stick-built affordable solution in this region.
Awesome. Well, Todd, I'm glad to have you on the group, and looking forward to working with you as we continue the good work.
Thank you.
So at this point, we're lacking a chair. We'd be looking to nominate someone to run the as chair for this meeting, for Chair Pro Tem. And does anybody want to make a nomination or volunteer? I have been serving as that role for the past couple absences of our chairs. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to nominate myself.
Well, this is
Well,
Bill.
I
then
nominate-
I will nominate Dustin Kerb.
And I second that.
Thank you. All those in favor of me being the Chair Pro Tem for this meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
I
All right, thank you. All right, next on our topics here, is there anybody else from the public who wishes to be recognized today? All right, I'm seeing no hands and hearing no voices, so we will move on from agenda item number 1 to agenda item number 2, which is a review and approve the agenda.
make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second, this is Bill.
All righty, is there any further discussion on the agenda before us today? All those in favor of approving the agenda as drafted, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? All righty, that motion passes. Moving on to agenda item number 3, review and approve the minutes from June 18th and June 20th.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
From both those dates. June 13th and June 20th. Is that right?
Yes, sir. You have a second on both minutes?
Second, this is Bill.
All righty. All those or is there any further discussion on approving the minutes from the 18th and the 20th? Seeing no hands and hearing no voices, all those in favor of approving both of those minutes, please say aye.
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 Is there any in opposition? Alrighty, that motion carries. Takes us to agenda item number 4, which is public comment on items not on the agenda. Are there members of the public here who would like to make a comment on something that we do not have in our agenda today? All right, there's no hands going up. So we will jump right into the review of work completed and received by staff. So at the end of last meeting, we tasked some folks to look at Appendix E and Appendix P. Appendix E was meant to kind of compare the ANSI A117 to Appendix E and see if our amendments are still required in there. Appendix P was to compare our amendments in Chapter 420 for the lofts to see if maybe we could move stuff to the appendix just by adopting the appendix and removing the state amendments in 420. So we have those. And then we have a review of Chapter 29's table of plumbing fixtures submitted in as well. It's not on this agenda. And then we have the IEBC chapters. So I'm going to jump into the review of Appendix E, starting off with here. So this is just a comparison to what we already have going on. Our reviewer didn't use any of our spreadsheets, which is okay. And we have here a comparison between Appendix C and the 2017 ICC ANSI A117. We've got some mission statements here to compare requirements listed to Appendix E. Okay. So we got E101 with the comment in general, this section is still relevant as there are items in Appendix E that are not addressed in the 2017 A117. And in the definitions, I'll include definitions. So the A117 doesn't specifically include these definitions here. And I don't think the point of this was to determine whether or not we should remove just our amendments there, just to take a look at it to be informed. And so this isn't intended to go in our final report here either. Let's go. So
I'm sorry, I wasn't here, but the one thing is the transient lodging. Someone says here, and it says which is defined in the A117. Is that different than the building definition? I actually haven't looked at that. Or are they the same? Are we gonna have two different definitions for transient lodging? Does anyone know that off the top of it? Or is it exactly the same?
So is that a definition within the building code in Chapter 2? I'm navigating there now on a different screen.
Dustin, there's a definition of transient.
I see that there.
Yeah, but I don't see transient lodging in here at all.
And then Hoyt, you are indicating that there's a definition for sure for that in the ANSI. Okay. Now I'm being gate kept on getting into the ANSI here. All right, so as well as the scoping of pilots transit lodging, as they are not provided in the 2017 117 scoping and 2010 ADA standards. So, as part of this one, It sounds like, so Hoyt, are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here. I'm sorry, I was looking at the same time. So, but
No worries.
it may not be in there. I just didn't remember. That's the only thing. And so if the
Okay.
person knew, then that's fine. I just hate it when you have different definitions and they conflict with the code, and there should be a reason for that. So I'm opening up the ANSI also, um, um, and just see what it says. It's just taking me a second to get to it.
Yancey
Okay.
doesn't have the transient lodging.
In the 2017.
Correct.
Okay, so then, and the IBC doesn't either. I thought they had transient,
No.
but
They have transient in there. And then in some of our occupancy classification sections, we have some transient stuff
okay,
as
so they
well.
have lodging house. They have lodging. So this is transient lodging. So it says, so they have lodging house, which is one family dwelling unit where one or more occupants are primary and permanent in nature. Okay, so that's the definition of lodging house. And then when you add transient in there, you would combine those in the building code. And I just want to make sure, do we really need a definition? If our building code already says the exact same thing.
I mean, I would say that the reviewer on this one is indicating that we don't have a specific definition for transient lodging anywhere else. We have some words that could be combined.
Yeah, well, we have lodging and then we have transient, so you'd put them together. I just want to make sure they're not different. I'm almost there.
Well, one thing from a technical standpoint, the definition only applies within the appendix anyway. So I think, so long as we don't have conflict with with the transient lodging definition elsewhere, which it looks like we don't have, then, it's not really a significant issue in my opinion.
Yeah, the one thing it says, transient by definition, occupancy of dwelling unit or sleeping units for not more than 30 days. So now we have transient lodging in there. So I just wanted to ask everyone else on there, you guys are experts on this. So would you say transient lodging would be not more than 30 days? Because the definition in the building code, it says that specifically. So and we don't define it here in our state building one. So
Well, none of this is state, so I guess we don't have any amendments in here. This is just a comparison strictly between the A117 and this appendix.
oh, right, but you got transient lodging in there, so that's what the code says right now in the A117. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, then
So-
that's fine. So we're still under the code. So the transient lodging is still something that is not more than 30 days. Okay.
I would say
We
so,
still
yes.
get to that.
And I'd say the way this one difference is when I look at the definition of lodging house, it's a one family dwelling, whereas this one has more dwelling units or sleeping units in there, which I think carries it outside of that lodging house definition.
Well, no, it's for transient. Transient by definition is
Oh, yes.
occupants of dwelling. Yeah, for 30 days.
I'm just saying if we combine the lodging house definition and the definition of transient, we wouldn't necessarily come up with what's here in front of us right now.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
It's just that length of time, the 30 days. What do other people think? Don't just go off from what I'm thinking. I
Yeah.
just, please add some input. Mike, you're pretty knowledgeable on this stuff. You should.
Yeah, I think yes, because transient is defined as 30 days, you could technically apply that here. I don't think it's significant. And I don't think there's a conflict. And, again, we're just, we're looking at Appendix E. This particular definition only applies to Appendix E. And even then, I think the term transient lodging is probably only used in, I think, just in the for communications features. It has very limited application anyway. So I have no concerns. I don't think we need to do anything with it. It's it's good to know and understand that it's there, but I don't think there's anything we need to be concerned with.
Okay. So for raised platforms, the A117 does not include scoping specific to raised platforms, and this provision should remain in Appendix E. The A117 does not address scoping for transient lodging, which we have kind of discussed already. It's recommended to keep the scoping requirements for transient lodging as they are not provided in the A117. Scoping.
Yeah, can I, when you
Go ahead.
do it though, okay? So like that either transient lodging, I'm actually looking at it, okay, in the building code right now. And they italicize transient lodging, which that means that definition comes out of the building code. It's italicized in the IBC. I'm looking at it right now.
So
So your definition isn't from ANSI. It has to be from the building code. If they italicize it, it's a definition from the IBC.
it looks like they missed some italicization here in these sections. If transient lodging is defined above.
Yeah, it's defined in the IBC, the one I'm looking at.
I think it's because when they do that formatting, they're looking for the words, and transient is italicized simply because transient is defined.
No,
in
transient
IBC.
lodging is italicized, the whole thing.
That's because you have a definition for transient and you have a definition for lodging. It's again.
No, there's no comma. There's no comma. So you have to combine them. That's the way the code is written by definition. If it was supposed to be different, you'd have to have a comma in there.
I'm simply pointing out the way they use a search feature when they're doing the italicizing. So every time transient shows up, it gets italicized. Every time lodging shows up, if it's defined, it gets italicized. Put the two together and it looks the same. So did anybody look, is lodging? Sorry, I should have looked that up before.
Well, lodging is not a word defined
It's not defined.
in the body of the chapters.
Yeah, correct. It's lodging house is, but not lodging.
That's correct.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, again,
I just wanted to run that by, just so people, I don't know who looked at it, just to be sure, because that's important to know.
yeah. Well, within Appendix E, transient lodging should be italicized because it is defined.
It is italicized. It is italicized in the code. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It is italicized. Yeah. It's not here though. When you're showing on the screen right there, you have transient. It looks like italicized, but in my version that I have on the code, I have transient lodging italicized. So the transient lodging that's right there in E104.2.1, to make sure we get this right, it should be transient lodging. Those two words should be italicized right there. And for some reason, I'm looking on the screen, and maybe I'm just going blind. I don't see the lodging part italicized with the transient.
You're correct. It is not.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's same as Hoyt. My paper book does have it italicized, but it's not on the screen.
So it's important. Sorry, Dustin. It's important to have it exactly italicized. Lodging should be italicized also. The way I've always Facilities is correct. It's not italicized, just transient lodging, because you got to go by that definition. Because if it's italicized in the code, that means it's defined in the code. If it's not italicized, you can go to any definition you want.
And so are both of you looking at physical copies in hand?
No, I'm looking at the online copy. I have the I'm sorry, I have the actual PDF. I'm looking at the PDF. I don't buy the book anymore. I use all
Right.
yeah, and I'm 99.9% sure. I can also go online and look at the online version, but I'm pretty sure they're exactly the same. So before we go that, just all you got to do is italicize logic.
Right. I mean, I agree with all that. I was curious.
So
The online version doesn't have it italicized. Not to make a big deal out of italicization of this appendix we don't even have adopted in Washington.
Yeah, so there's a difference. The 2021 both IPC, 2021 IPC and 2021 Washington State Building Code, both words transient lodging, they're both italicized. But in 2024 IPC, only the word transient is italicized, and that's why what we're seeing now it's from 2024 IPC. So I think that was an error, and it should be transient lodging to be italicized. Not sure why it was not.
I can tell you why.
I guess.
Yeah, because I see what you're saying. You're right. In the 2024, they just have transient.
Yeah, so I don't know if they did that purposely or or intentionally, or it was just an editorial error.
Well, the one we're looking at, I believe, is the first printing for the 2024, and I don't ever count on the first printing. So I don't know. I got to be honest, I don't know. That'd be an ICC question.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, but I know it's not put in the significant changes. And usually when they do a change in definition, they do that. So, but it is an appendix, so too. So,
Yeah, and getting back to Dustin's question, I mean, yes, I agree with Andy. It's got to be just an administrative issue. But Dustin, I have a physical 2024 in front of me, which does not have the lodging italicized. I have a physical 2021 in front of me, which does have it italicized, and I have the PDF from online of the 24, which does not. So
Okay.
So it really does look to be just an administrative, somebody just didn't pay clear attention in the formatting, which we all know there's a lot of those issues throughout the code.
Well, I guess my guess is that potentially if this appendix isn't adopted, that definition doesn't apply across the code, and maybe that's why they didn't pick it up in their search
No.
for transient
This
lodging.
is adopted.
no, I don't. I do work for ICC. I'm on a couple of committees on the technical side for the building code. No, it's a mistake somewhere. Either one is correct and one isn't correct. And I to be honest, just looking at it now, I don't know which one's the correct one. I think it's both supposed to be italicized. Based on my experience, that's what I've always used, but that doesn't mean I'm correct.
I think you are correct in this case because transient lodging is defined.
Yeah, that's what I've always. So all I'm saying, Dustin, unless you want to get verification from ICC, I would italicize transient lodging in our for the appendix C. Because we're looking at a first printing. Yeah, that lodging should be italicized. I don't know if you could do that, but
I can, but I don't want to go through and find all of these definitions
no,
here.
you don't have. No, you don't have to. You don't have to.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying in the other places. But if you
Yeah.
do it in the beginning, that's usually okay. At least that's okay. Because at least you know it's defined in the code. So if you miss the other places, it's not the end of the world.
It's just one to be sent to ICC as an errata.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm a stickler on the code stuff, so. I didn't mean to take so much time on this one little issue.
It's all right. All right, so for our publication, we'll get this one taken care of with the comment in there. It'll just be bookkeeping at the end of the process here. So we've at least got a couple places to hit transient lodging to be italicized. Moving to group I3. The A117 does not address scoping for T systems, notification devices, or telephones specific to holding cells. Provision should remain in Appendix E. Dwelling units and sleeping units does not address scoping for these communication features, and this provision should remain in Appendix E. The 2017 A117 provides technical requirements for units with communication features in 1106. However, there are no scoping requirements. Section E 104.2.4 is essentially redundant with respect to the technical requirements of the A117. It is recommended that this section be removed. So,
Motion detected at the doorbell.
What's the opinion of the group of amending this section out of the appendix?
Here's a question I just have real quick. Chapter 7 does have communication elements and features. So to me, you should amend this out and follow the ANSI of chapter 7 that talks about all the communication, because that's worked at a so I think amending it out would be the way I would go. So because chapter 7 covers everything you need on that.
Okay. Portable toilets does not address scoping for portable toilets and bathing rooms, should remain. They are provided in the 2010 ADA standards. Gaming machines, depositories, vending machines, change machines, and similar equipment. It has been added to chapter 11, section 1110.19. The gaming machines could be removed from the sections, but the remainder of this provision should remain in Appendix E. So we could pop out gaming machines from this section here. Is there any thoughts on making an amendment to this section? All right. Moving on to mailboxes. No scoping for mailboxes in the A117, and this one should remain. ATMs and fare machines is not scoped in the A117, and this one should remain in Appendix E. A117 does not address scoping for two-way communication systems at a building entrance, and this provision should remain. E106. Telephone requirements. Not included. Remains keeping this section in the appendix. 107 signage. They're indicated in 703 and chapter 11, section 1112. Recommended the scoping provisions remain in the appendix. Neither 2017 A117 or chapter 11 specifically address signage at portable toilet bathing facilities, bus stops, fixed facilities / stations, and airports. Bus stops are provided in the A117. Does not address scoping for bus stops. There is duplication of technical requirements in Appendix E, though the language is not verbatim. Many of the technical requirements between the A117 and the Appendix E are substantially similar. This provision could be removed from the appendix. Opinions on removing section 108 from the appendix?
Can I ask a question? There is one you set up other about bathrooms, right?
What about that one?
The person said it's not in A117. But it says accessible toilets or bathrooms. Where not all toilets or bathrooms are accessible. They do have a provision for signs to be put in there. You said there wasn't?
So are we talking about for the portable toilets and bathing rooms or the signage stuff they had in here?
The signage.
So in signage, their technical signage requirements are indicated in section 703 of the A117.
Okay, got it. Okay, good.
Are we good to go?
I'm on
now?
that committee, so that's why.
Okay.
So I just wanted to be sure that because it was added in the 2000 in the next version. So
Gotcha.
Dustin, I have a kind of a dumb question, but is the appendix optional?
No, this one's adopted. I said earlier in the meeting it's not adopted, but I was wrong on that one.
Oh,
So this one's adopted by the state for everybody. And then when it comes to accessibility requirements, local jurisdictions cannot make amendments to these sections.
so this is going to be considered compliant with 88 federal provisions and not A117, but Appendix E instead?
No. I think we're just looking at this to see
that's
if there's conflicts between the A117 and Appendix E. And I don't think that any real conflicts have been identified other than there's some maybe duplicative things that aren't required.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
For him. The federal standards are behind on the code. Okay. As you're probably aware of, they're back at an older version of ANSI. They're not up to this level, but I've gone through it, and if you go through the ANSI, you will exceed the federal requirements per the ANSI for federal funding. And an example of that, the circle, for example, is still at 60 inches for federal housing, right? When you have a federal funded project, but the circle has changed to 68. This has been discussed at the national, but the federal government has not adopted the new HUD and all that standard, but it has been gone very thoroughly. If you follow the ANSI, you will be in compliance, but there are some other HUD requirements that aren't in the ANSI that you have to follow. So you really got to use two codes to really meet the HUD requirements, but you will meet it through ANSI. So that's just an FYI.
Will either one of them give you safe harbor?
No. The safe harbor is all defined by federal, okay? But everything in the ANSI exceeds, when I say exceeds, you will be in the safe harbor, but there are additional stuff to ANSI that is in the federal that you got to meet to make sure you meet the safe harbor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. It's silly. It's just our national government just hasn't adopted it, but it's in right now. It's in committee, and hopefully they adopt it. But you know that the government, it's a process. So, but I'm sorry, I don't mean to go off tangent on that. I thought I'd just answer the question for the person because I know the answer. So.
Okay. Covered bus stops. Technical requirements for bus stops are provided in the A117 section 805.2. The 2017 A117 does not address scoping for bus stops. There is duplication of technical requirements in Appendix E. Although the language is not verbatim, many of the technical requirements and Appendix E are substantially similar. This provision could be removed from Appendix E. Do we have any opinions on making a suggestion to remove this section from Appendix E? All right. Transportation facilities and stations. Technical transportation facility requirements are included in section 805 of the 2017 A117. Scoping is not. It is recommended that this section remain in Appendix E. However, it is noted that some of the technical requirements are covered in Chapter 11 Example, signage characteristics. Airports, A117 does not address the scoping for airports, and this should remain in the appendix. And it was recommended that the standard designation above is changed from ADAAG to the 2006 DOT ADA standards. Okay. Does anybody have any information on the change of the name here?
I have not gone through the 2006 Department of Transportation accessibility standards, so I don't.
All right. I believe that brings us to the end of appendix.
Yeah, just to let you know, Dustin, I have gone to through the safe harbor stuff for the stuff, but I haven't done that. I don't know if anyone else has.
Okay. Who was this? Michael Shaw may have had an opportunity to do that. He is our persons with disability or accessibility expert seat on this group, and unfortunately couldn't be here today. So this, I guess, stuff needs to be put into our tables, and staff can wrangle that one. Is there any more discussion we'd like to have on the comments on this Word document?
I would like to, whoever did the analysis, I would like to thank them. So they did a nice comparison there.
Yes.
As for recommended amendments, I'm all for removing conflicts, but it looks like in this case they weren't necessarily conflicts, they were redundancies. And
That's
I don't, in my opinion, I don't think we need to address the redundancies. I think it's harmless.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Mike on that, because then what happens, people say, well, why didn't you address it in other places where there's redundancy? And it just makes it more difficult when that happens. So when there's redundancy in there, I think we should not duplicate it personally in our state adopted codes.
Okay. So when I get ready to put all this for Appendix E into our spreadsheet, we have no existing amendments in this section. And there's no significant changes in here, but I think that we would just put together a section on this one that, doesn't recommend any changes in here, just to include in our kind of report for updates on these sections. And so I guess we'd be in the position to entertain a motion to move this one to the master document with no proposed amendments.
So moved.
Second.
All righty. Any additional conversation on moving this appendix to our master document? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of moving Appendix E to our master document, please say aye.
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 Any in opposition? Hearing none, that motion passes. All right, moving on to Appendix P. We touched on this one briefly to move our construction debris material management appendix from 2021 Appendix P to Appendix Q. The new Appendix P is for lofts, and I have that one coming up here. So looking at this one, I left all the blue language in here and inserted state amendments to these sections. So anything that is struck out in here is stuff that's not included in our amendment language. Anything underlined is included in our amendment language. And then all of the blue text that isn't altered is also included in our amendment language. So for the P101.1 general, The main difference in here is the location in the code book being in an appendix versus in chapter 420. And they changed, they have a definition for sleeping lofts in the model code. And last year in the 2021 amendments, we had a definition for lofts included. And it looks like the section for general has just picked up the term sleeping loft instead of using the term loft. And instead of using section 420 or appendix, or that's the change there, is instead of using appendix language, we're using section 420 language in here across for general. So on this particular section, this could replace our state amendment in section 420. And if we adopted this appendix as a whole, there's some additions to our state amendments in chapter 420 that would be relevant coming up later. So in loft limitations for our state amendment, again, the model code picked up the word sleeping for sleeping loft. And in this section, the main change here is using appendix language versus chapter language. And they added the word conditions in here. And so this one too could also replace our state amendment, contains the same regulatory requirements. For P101.3 loft ceiling height, they have the same thing with the sleeping. They've got some minor changes here for ceiling height. And the model code reads the clear height above below.
Hey, Dustin.
Yes, sir.
Justin, just to let you know why you want to use sleeping lofts is because it's confusing because some people treat it as a mezzanine. Okay.
Right.
There's different requires for mezzanine. So yeah, we should definitely keep it a sleeping loft because that's been worked out in the national code. And I agree with the national code. A lot of us from the state of Washington actually put that through on the national code, just in case you didn't know that. So
Yeah, I mean, it looks like this is all Washington language through and through for the most part.
it is. So to let you know what we tried to do, we tried to get it in the, just so you guys, everyone knows here, we tried to get it in the model code or the appendix. So one of our groups tried to put it in the model code and that failed, but we did get it approved for the appendix. So really they're the same. We took everything from Washington and put it in there. So all this came from Washington, just an FYI with some feedbacks from people around the nation.
Yeah,
That's why it's appendix.
Yeah, there's some very minor changes here in the loft ceiling height section from our appendix to the model code. They use clear height below the sleeping loft floor instead of the ceiling height below the loft. Anyway, same regulatory effect in this section, so this one could replace our state amendment section as well. The loft area just picks up the word sleeping in here. This one could replace our state amendment. Looking at the definitions, our section in 420 doesn't have a definition included in the body like this. So our state amendment section, or our state amendment definition for loft reads the same as this one right here. And so we could pick up that definition in the front of the book, or we could leave it here in the appendix as well. So this one could replace our state amendment there. For the means of egress section, our general section was named permanent egress for lofts in our state amendment in chapter 420. Other than that, there's very minor editorial differences. Speaking to the
just FYI, we do have the definition of sleeping lofts in the model code, right?
I'm not sure. I have to look at.
Yeah, we do. It's if you look in the appendix, there's a P102 definitions, and it actually defines sleeping loft. So it kind of has that in 102. Yeah.
Well, that's right here. I thought you were asking if we had it in the chapter 2.
No, it's not in chapter 2 because appendix is a standalone chapter a lot of times.
So in the 2024 code as amended by Washington, we include a definition for loft that reads the same as this definition here. And so anyway, this could replace that definition. If we adopted this appendix, we could pull it out of chapter 2. For the means of egress, they pick up the word sleeping in this one instead of using of this code. We use the chapter numbers, so there's not a whole lot of difference here. We could replace our state amendment with this section. Ceiling height at the loft means of egress is the same as our state amendment, with picking up the word sleeping. Moving down to P 103.3 through P 104.1. These
Am I-
are, go
Dustin,
ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You're going really fast. I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that you want to delete sleeping?
No, I'm not. What you see here is me inserting our amendments over this section to see what the differences are comparatively to
Okay.
from here. So if I was going to make a recommendation on this appendix for adoption, it would be to adopt it as drafted in the model code with no amendments.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just wasn't following. I apologize. I just wanted to be sure I'm understanding correctly. So
Got it.
my mistake.
No worries. These sections for stairways and different types of ascension devices and then guards is not included in a specific Washington amendment that talks about egress from sleeping lofts. I didn't compare these to the sections in the egress portion of the book, but I am going to wager that they're similar in there. So it's not included, but if I would, like I said just a second ago, if we were going to adopt this appendix, I wouldn't want to amend these sections out. And so I have in here, just consider including in the adoption. We have a smoke alarms section in our section in chapter 420 in the 2021 edition. Reads essentially the same. Instead of saying complying with UL 217, our amendment says in accordance with section 907.2.11.1 or 907.2.11.2. And my question is the inclusion of the 907.2 language duplicative of the UL 217 language? And is one better than the other? I'm not super well versed in that.
I know the answer to that. I was at the hearings on these things during the testimony. It is the UL. It's a listing that has to be on the smoke alarms, and it's actually that's also in the model code too. It is complying with UL 217 is basically correct. If you go to 907, 907 is all IFC, and the IFC actually gets you to UL 217.
Okay. So then a recommendation for this section would be to not include the references chapter 907 is what I'm thinking.
And based on my knowledge, you get the same conclusion. So it's just I would just keep just make sure it has a listing on the smoke alarms. I believe that's always required. They just don't want unlisted smoke alarms. So that's all.
Okay. And then we have a
Dustin,
reference. Yes.
sorry, where are you referencing these amendments? Because Appendix P
So these amendments don't exist in Appendix P. This is a comparison of Appendix P, which is new this year, to our section 420.14. So it'd be the WAC 5150 -0420.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then also in here, we have a reference standard section with the inclusion of UL 217. I don't see any reason to remove this section if we were to adopt the appendix, but it's not included in our Washington State Amendment of section 420. And that is the end of this one. This is the movement of the previous Appendix P section from earlier meetings. So, the question, I guess, would be, is the recommendation of this group to strike the amendments in section 420 and adopt Appendix P, and what the adoption of the appendix versus having it in chapter 420 actually means?
Dustin, my opinion is in 420 is better than separately adopting an appendix chapter. It may, I mean, even though it's kind of redundant now, if you were to adopt the appendix, if unless they were exact.
They're pretty darn close. There's some, like I said, added features for egress components here and guards along there. But other than that, in my reading of these sections, I would say that the regulatory effect is like 99.9% identical compared to the sections in 420. But I guess, Hoyt, you mentioned that we had some groups from Washington going to get this in the
Yeah.
model code. With it currently being by state amendment in chapter 4, is that's the desired location for this information, as far as Washington trying to get it into the model code books, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But you said the problem is sleeping lofts. I'm looking at it real quick in 420. Did they get sleeping lofts in the 4? I don't think they did in 2024.
In the 2024 section 420, I don't think it has it, but that's all state amendment stuff in chapter 4 from 2021.
Oh yeah, so it is actually a duplicate. Okay, it's just because we couldn't get it in the national code. So when we went to the national, we tried it both ways, and people didn't like it in the main body of the code. So they said, because people are interpreting these sleeping lofts differently than other people were. So then they said that, so we did the appendix. So when we went, one of us tried to put it in the model code. One of us said the appendix. Both of us from WABO. I think Tacoma, we were the ones that said the appendix. We just got volunteered to do that. It wasn't like, but they should be the same. I mean, there
Right.
really shouldn't be any difference. So,
Now, quick question for future interactions with ICC. Does the inclusion of the state amendment in chapter 4 lend weight to the argument for inclusion in the model code?
well, we tried that on all the Washington amendments, but sometimes they get voted down. So,
I mean, if we had it in the appendix, would the stance to get it in chapter 4 be weaker?
no, just people get it. The reason okay, a lot of times you put it in the appendix, okay, just to give you some history. And 9 times out of 10 from the appendix, it morphs into the model code. That's why a lot of people don't like the appendix. That's one of the things. But on the national level, they thought this would be a good place for the appendix so it could be worked out nationally to see if there's any problems with it, because we already do it. So that's the problems with appendix. People usually go in both ways. So if it doesn't get adopted in the model code, they get in the appendix. And then after a few years, it morphs into the main code. That's a pretty common thing for the national level. So it's up to what other people think. I mean, I'm just trying to give you the history on that. So the answer is yes. It wouldn't make, I don't think it makes a difference, but that's just.
Okay.
But I'm someone that votes against appendix because of that reason sometimes on the national level, because I know it's the process to get into the model code as a step. But this was something we voted for because the sleeping lofts are coming in more and more and the code hasn't been dealing with it. So that was the reason.
Looking back at chapter 2, I'm not spotting the document right away in my big selection of documents here. But for chapter 2, the definition of loft, I believe, was recommended to be carried forward. Did we evaluate that? Should sleeping loft replace our definition of loft since they're identical verbiage?
Well, there's more requirements for a sleeping loft than there is for just a loft. You can have a loft for like storage, okay? That's not a sleeping loft. There's other things you have to do. If it's a sleeping room, you got to have a smoke alarm in there, right? But if it's not a sleeping loft, if it's just a loft for storage, you don't have to have that. So there are differences between a loft and a sleeping loft. That's what's the big argument on the national level that people got all confused about. So your question is, I think we should specifically keep it the way it is right now with the sleeping lofts. So,
Okay.
but someone else can give some opinion on that. I'm just telling you in the national code what it was. I haven't gone through because lofts have a lot of different other meanings throughout. I mean, you have like, like you go into a Home Depot sometimes, right? You'll have a little office space sometimes, and they'll have a loft up above that they use for storage things. That is a different requirement than what this requires. So.
Gotcha.
Because it's not a mezzanine. It's kind of a definition of loft. So I don't know if we really want to mix them up right now. I think in the future it's going to get cleared up, or I hope it does.
Okay.
What do others think on that? I mean, we've been getting these all the time in Tacoma. These sleeping lofts. It's been a something. I'm assuming, Mike, you probably have gotten a lot of them too. Because they're trying to increase the density of housing in cities, and one of the ways they're increasing the density is putting in sleeping lofts.
Yeah, I think that's why, in my opinion, I think it's best that we leave it as we have it. We keep it in 420 because one, it makes it more visible and more obvious. And on the other side of it, we keep hammering at the national level to try to get it moved from the appendix into chapter 4. So, but for our purposes and for the tag, I think it's best to keep our amendments in 420 like they are, and and have the appendix here that we can just keep referring to and try to work it at the national level.
I'd echo that. All right, so as far as moving this into part of our reports for significant changes, I guess the general recommendation is what I'm hearing is keep the state amendments in chapter 4 for lofts. We may consider adding the term sleeping lofts into that language. I'd have to go back and look at what we did in chapter 4 to see what our spreadsheet says there. Does the group think that we should pick up the word sleeping in the definitions, or not in the definitions, in the body of that language of section 420?
Well, the reason I think you should is a structural requirement. Okay, for sleeping rooms and stuff like that, it's 30 pounds per square foot. All other rooms is 40 pounds per square foot. So if you keep it as a sleeping, right, they have to design it for 30. If you keep it as lofts or used for storage, they got to design it for 40. So I think we should keep it sleeping. So.
Yeah, I'm supportive of that also, because sleeping does help. The new language is good, it seems. So I'd be in support of updating our 420 amendment if need be to include a lot of that language. But do we need a code change proposal to go that route?
Yeah, we'd need a code change proposal on that one, since all of our appendix language uses just the terms lofts.
So just out of curiosity, to make sure we're not taking something away by adding that word, currently we can use a loft for living area too, right?
Yes.
So if we
Yes, you
add
can.
sleeping loft, we're requiring them to use it for sleeping?
No, what the reason for sleeping loft was to give the requirements for when it's used for sleeping, which seems kind of weird because there's different requirements for sleeping. Like like, for example, in lofts, right? When you're under, egressing out of it, right? How do you get the egress? I mean, do you have an operable window? You got to have certain ceiling heights, right? For a sleeping loft. But for an actual loft, there is no minimum ceiling height, right? You can have a loft that's only 2 feet high. So you wanted to distinguish it between a sleeping loft and just a loft that's going in there. And then at the national level, people were calling these lofts like they were, I know this is I think this sounds not very intelligent, but they were talking, well, what's the difference between a cabinet? Well, cabinet, I mean, maybe a cat sleeps on it, but it's not a sleeping loft. That's what people are, I'm just,
Yeah.
so there is a difference between a sleeping loft and a loft that's used for storage. So,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at these exceptions, there are 4 residential occupancies, and it allows you to basically install a loft. So I would just, again, in an effort for the tag not to make a change to the code, right now you could use a loft as a reading area, even though it doesn't have the correct ceiling height or anything else. You could use a loft for all sorts of purposes. But if we did change this and then mimic the definition as well, then we would be looking for spaces that are only allowed to be slept on. So I don't know, just feels a little like we're limiting by adding that, but it's my take on it.
Well,
I
mean,
agree. I
guess
agree.
the appendix is just labeled sleeping lofts, whereas our language addresses all kinds of lofts that aren't mezzanines. Sounds like I stepped on somebody there. Does anybody have anything else?
because Appendix P is all sleeping lofts. All of Appendix P has to be for sleeping lofts. So when you say lofts there, okay, it can't be a storage loft, for example, or it can't be something else. It has to meet all these requirements for a sleeping loft, or they have to define it as something else. So that was the big thing. I personally think I'm still at the support to kind of keep Appendix P unless, because lofts, and I'll have to go back. I totally forgot what we did in 4. But I think sleeping lofts are different than lofts because of all the different stuff you can use a loft for in a different type of building. So, and there's different design, as I said, there's different design criteria for like a storage loft has a different design criteria than a sleeping loft, for example. So,
But maybe not in a residential occupancy where you're, I mean, you're not
no,
putting
you do
up
because
heavy machinery on your.
no, because a residential occupancy, it's 40 pounds per square foot everywhere else, except where you're sleeping. Sleeping is 30.
Oh.
So if it's not a sleeping room, okay. So for example, you have an office in a house, technically, or your living room, for example, your living room is not a sleeping room by definition. Your living room technically can be designed it's for 40 pounds, but your bedroom, which is for a sleeping room, can be designed for 30 pounds per square foot by definition of code. If you look at the design for the structural, so I think, it's up to everyone else, but I'm just saying there is a difference, and there's other areas too where the same thing happens too. I'll let someone else talk on it. I think I've given everything, all the knowledge that I've learned from this thing.
If I could interject real quick in terms of a home builder and the issues with lofts and interpretation, I do believe, and again, I'm coming into this cold, so my apologies, but I believe it is very important to separate out what a loft is versus a sleeping loft. There's a lot of confusion on job sites, design in the field in terms of how you can use a loft and what is a loft. And so just in terms of the kind of the nuts and bolts real world, I think if it's a sleeping loft, it needs to be stated and adequately described, because I've seen in working with our engineers, designers, how you can try to manipulate what a loft is. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Yeah, here's another example on that. So if you have a sleeping loft, it says in there, maximum depth, it cannot be less than 3 feet, right? Floor area has to be 35 square feet. So that means every single loft, you can start saying every loft has to start meaning that. So I do think we should keep sleeping personally. So like we said.
Perhaps our best of both worlds would be to add or do a code change proposal that adds another 420 subsection that adopts Appendix P. So that our current state amendment remains, which addresses lofts, and then we add a 420.15 that adopts Appendix P. Then we get the best of both worlds, and it's all listed there in 420.
That would really help with clarity in terms of an end reader and construction.
I like that one.
I'm totally fine with that as well. I mean, if anything, it'll just provide clarity for somebody that wants to build a sleeping loft. They can just go here. Because even like in the section before that we talked about for smoke detectors or smoke alarms, my bad. It referenced 907, whatever it was. Well, 907, the reason I think they did it that way is that says if it's used for sleeping, then you need the smoke alarms. Whereas this section just says make it comply with UL7 as if you're always going to do it because it's accounting for it always being a sleeping loft. So
Yeah, that's my opinion. I do think that this Appendix P, as the code gets developed, will get into the model code. I mean, just as people get used to it because of the shortage of housing. I mean, cities right now are using this. New York's using it, similar. LA's using it. I mean, it's where you have lack of housing. In the rural areas, you don't have the problem. This is for multi-use, R1s, R2s, and things like those kinds of. But just an FYI. But it's whatever you guys think. I'm fine with either way.
So on this one, as we include this in our spreadsheets, should we recommend an adoption of not necessarily Appendix P, but adoption of the contents into Chapter 4 on that one, and then we just have to put a proposal together?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be perfect. That would be absolutely fantastic if we did that. So
that seems like a lot more work though, right, Dustin? Because then you're having to incorporate it.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
mean,
Dustin, that is a lot of work, just FYI.
That's future Dustin's problem a little bit. I mean, I'm all for the good ideas, and yes, it is more work. But as we get ready to do proposals, I mean, I guess the proposal period's open now as of last Friday, and we could put something together to propose this goes into the body of the text, or we could just leave it alone and let local jurisdictions adopt it if they see fit. They'd have to bring this to the SBCC for approval, but I don't see any reason why the SBCC wouldn't let local jurisdictions adopt this if they want to use this specific section.
Can't the SBC just adopt Appendix P?
We could.
Yeah. That's what to be honest, that's what I think. I like Appendix P because it is kind of a standalone and it's specific for sleeping lofts. If it was, for right now, for this first cycle going through for these lofts, rather than doing for us, we've been doing alternate methods and materials, trying to deal with these things. I would like the state building code council to adopt Appendix P, and let's work with it for a while so other people are using it, and then see if there's mistakes or changes that need to be done. That it's not perfect.
After hearing you state it that way, Hoyt, I like that idea maybe a little bit better. One, it's a little less work for future Dustin, but also it leaves it in that kind of beta testing ground where it's not just, it's not there in the body of everything. We can mess with it a little bit. So, and we can also discuss this a little bit further as our master report gets prepped. So would I guess for today, the suggestion be to adopt Appendix P without modifications? Because as I see it, it reads the same except for the inclusion of some of the egress components in here in the definition.
Dustin, I'd say yes to that, but if I could, I feel like it would be kind of key to do what I think Mike said or Michael said about adding the reference to chapter 4. So my motion would be to alter chapter 4 to reference Appendix P and adopt Appendix P as written.
Okay.
That was a motion. I'd second that.
That was
Yeah, that's a very good
Michael,
idea. If
Tim.
that's an option, that's a good option too.
That is definitely an option. So we have a motion and a second on the floor to adopt, well, to recommend adoption of Appendix P while also including a reference in Chapter 4 pointing users to Appendix P. This would need a proposal from the group here, and we can move that to the master and be pretty much done with it for the moment. And I guess, is there any further conversation on that motion? Seeing no hands, all those in favor of moving Appendix P to our master document with a recommendation to adopt and include reference in Chapter 4, please say aye.
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 Is there anybody in opposition? Seeing no hands, hearing no voices, that one passes. Okay. So that clears us of, well, we have a chapter, sorry, not chapter, but table 29 from Brett Conway here. Just doing a quick look at the table there. So the big difference here is that our state amendment doesn't have this column for drinking fountain sections, and does have this column for occupancy in here. So he has gone through and modified this table for the publication, and most of this looks like it's all just straight there. He has a couple state amendments here as well. I believe that that's what he's got going on. He's got some green in the bottom of this table.
And so this is Brett, and
Brett, I didn't realize you're online.
I came on late, sorry. Our state amendments has a whole section on drinking fountains, and so I was suggesting we consider deleting the model codes column, the one on the right-hand side, and just leaving our state amendment text further down in the code, which describes drinking fountains differently than the model code. So just keep the state amendment intact. And
that's also because we're in the Uniform Plumbing Code, and this is modeled off this stuff in the IBC is modeled off the International Plumbing Code. So I agree with that. I think we should keep it as our state has.
Keep this table like that.
Yeah, I think that would be mine, and then have we have a section actually for drinking fountains. We also have an amendment for drinking fountains too, where you can use water filling stations too. That's another big thing. Just where you can.
And that should be, those sections should be at the bottom of this Word document. I kept them into this discussion.
Yeah. So I agree with that. Exactly what you said. I think we should keep doing that.
Okay. So for chapter 29, table 2902, let's move this one to the master document maintaining the state amendment. Is that the motion we can entertain?
Did someone, when they looked at it, did they just check the uniform plumbing code, the next cycle that we're adopting? There wasn't any changes to that?
I believe that we did not, Brett, I may be speaking
No,
for you.
yeah, I didn't. I just did a real
Disregard.
detailed between the 24 model code for IBC against the Washington State Amendment table here. So I didn't look at the UPC table.
Yeah, it might be good just to check that, just to see if they made the changes. To be honest, I haven't looked at it either. So, but I know sometimes the uniform plumbing code, the next cycle, they do make changes to it. And I don't, the international codes all follow the international plumbing code. So it's just good to look at the UPC uniform plumbing code just to make sure there's not a conflict in it. I don't think there is. But the ones I've looked at, there hasn't been, but of course I haven't looked at every single occupancy. So.
So
Scoping is always going to come out of the building code. I mean, regardless of which plumbing. So we
I
need
thought
to continue to-
that was decided. What Mike's saying right now is that chapter 29 covered all the scoping and then the installation was UPC.
No, so what happens is the uniform plumbing code also has a table like this too. It's a standalone.
I know, but I
So-
thought it was decided that we use the IBC.
That yes, but not for the drinking fountain. You see how we're doing taking out of the if you go up on the table that you're showing, I thought you said you're taking out the drinking fountain one, which means you have to, yeah, you're taking all these out, right? So there you go to the UPC for that. But yeah, I think, and the other thing is, I'm not 100% sure that I thought there was a difference. Yeah, I got to look at. Yeah,
Well,
I haven't compared them. I did just FYI, but you're right. They're supposed to be the same, to be honest. I just haven't compared them myself. They should be the same.
Dustin, could you just scroll down further outside the table and beyond the keep going down and then below this? And so this section in green, I'm suggesting we keep as is. So that's how Washington State defines drinking fountains rather than what the model code is showing.
So
Yeah.
just so everybody knows, there's a legislative mandate that we come up with some more expanded bottle filling stations language in here. And there's a proposal I've got somewhere that I wrote last year to address the legislative requirement to submit during our period here. So this section will get some changes here this cycle. Just a heads up.
But Dustin, does that play into that then? Is you made the changes to 2902.5, you didn't make them to, or 0.5.4, you didn't make them to the table when you wrote those?
No, I did not.
Okay, so I think I totally am on board with Brett, and sounds like, we've got legislative reasons why we want to get rid of the drinking fountain column in the table and utilize just what we have in 2902.5. So I totally support what he's got going on this proposal.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
All right, so as far as moving the table 2902, is it 0.2? 2902.1 to our master document with the recommendation keeping it the same as is with a comparison to the UPC. I guess we're in a position to entertain that motion.
So I'll make a motion to move 2902.1 to the master documents with the drinking fountain column removed. Well, actually, we can't do that, can we? That would be a recommended amendment.
No, that is, so what we're looking at right here is our state amendment. So that is already removed. This is just showing up here for drafting for publication.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to move 2902.1 to the master documents as adopted without the drinking fountains column and as written for the drinking fountain section below.
I second that. With verification with the Uniform Plumbing Code, because I haven't looked at the new Uniform Plumbing Code.
I'll comment on that. I don't think we need to do any kind of verification because the Uniform Plumbing Code, our state adoption of it simply, I mean, it says sections 422.1 through 422.5 and table 422.1 are not adopted. So
Okay, never mind then.
we don't adopt the plumbing code minimum fixtures. That's why I say, our scoping all is going to come from IBC, and the state's adoption of the UPC does not include minimum number of fixtures. So all the more reason we need to continue to maintain our state amended table 2902.1.
Yeah, that'd be great then.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of moving table 2902.1 to our master document as depicted here, please say aye.
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 Any in opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. All right, that
Question,
brings us.
Dustin, has
Yes, sir.
the plumbing code tag, which I assume now is combined with mechanical, have
Yes.
they looked at the table to see if they want to incorporate any of the model code changes into the table?
They have not, as far as I'm aware, they've been just only looking at the mechanical code. So we could flag this one for some collaboration with them. So as we get down to the end of this process and we're getting ready to recommend our reports to the committees, it is intended to have some combined tag meetings where we're going to get together with the fire tag and also the MVP tag, and anything that we have flagged to go over with other folks, we'll just hit real quick and make sure that we are meeting the mark as far as correlation and non-conflicting code sections in those correlation meetings.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I also just opened up the Uniform Plumbing Code, and Mike's right on that. On that, there is no table on that, so it just tells you how to do it. That's what it does. So.
All right, so moving to the IEBC, I have the preface here, which has got pretty much the same changes as all the other preface documents we've gone through. We are still in WAC 5150 here. The effective date as it stands right now is November 1, 2026. This first printing date will likely change with the publication of the Washington amended version. Scrolling through, there wasn't a whole lot else in the preface that needed any updates. I don't think that I had anything in the table of contents, but I'll just scroll through looking for stuff. And then we insert the WAC 5150 in here. So 5150.001 is no changes. 002, no changes. The stuff that you see in red here is something that I think that we should update 003 with. The 2024 editions has to happen as part of our update, but because we're including these sections in the beginning of the books, we should include the International Existing Building Code. If we're not adopting all the different WAC as well, we'll have to include this one there as well. That's the main change here. 008 on our implementation date, November 1, 2026, needs to change. And that's all I have for the preface chapter in here. Does anybody want to talk about any specific sections, or we are in a position to entertain moving that to our master document?
Can I ask one thing? I always thought this was weird in this thing. When it says including Appendix E of the International Existing Building Code. The International Existing Building Code is a supplementary to accessibility requirements. But then down below, we have the barrier-free requirements. And that always threw me for a loop. So that one up there where it says including Appendix E, Appendix E is supplement to the accessibility requirements. So you have to meet Appendix E of the building code, but then later on it tells you you also have to meet. Oh no, I guess I'm not. That's 03. Never mind. I see how it said. So, never mind. So you don't meet the new ANSI. Okay. I always thought that was weird. So, but now reading it again, I see how it says it. Sorry about that.
No worries. Anybody have anything else to go back and look at? Then we're in a position to entertain a motion to move the preface to our master document.
Lance also moved.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion on the preface? Hearing none, all those in favor moving the preface to our master document, please say aye.
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 Any in opposition? Hearing none, that one passes. All right. Close that down. That brings us to chapter 1. Hold on. Let me get some stuff here. Wait, I got this one from you. That's not it. All right, we have IEBC chapter 1 here on this line. Let me get my whack open here real quick. All right, so we have 101.4.2 and 101.6 in chapter 1 as the existing amendments. Let me also open up a copy of chapter 1.
I have it open also. So.
Okay. All right, looking at chapter 1, as far as our existing amendments, you are recommending keeping both of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep it what our state has.
And then as far as a significant changes report, do you have any of these labeled as significant in this chapter? Doesn't look like it.
No, I haven't. I haven't. Not in chapter 1.
Okay.
Basically, they took a lot of the stuff from the IBC and put it in the IEBC. So.
A lot of the administrative stuff from IBC is just in here.
Yeah, and then also they don't have in the IBC called a performance method. So they have a performance method you can do. So.
Okay.
But the adult family homes and substantial damage and substantial improvement, we should keep those.
So
that's in chapter 2.
Oh, that's the chapter. Okay. Got confused for a moment.
Yeah, chapter 1's all administrative.
Okay. And then the local jurisdictions can amend these as well as they see fit. So looks good. So as far as chapter 1, recommendation to keep both of the state amendments as drafted in there and no significant changes. Does anybody want to go back and look at anything in particular on chapter 1? All right, not seeing anything. We are in a position to entertain a motion on chapter 1 to move to our master document.
I mean, if no one's gonna make it, I make a move to move it. I mean, it's, you know, chapter 1's
Gotcha.
pretty straightforward. So,
Second, Lansdowne.
All right, all those in favor of moving chapter 1 to our master document, please say aye.
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 Is there any opposition? Hearing none, that motion carries. And that brings us to chapter 2. All right, so in chapter 2, we have some existing definitions. Let's see, we've got adult family home, substantial damage, and substantial improvement.
yeah, because the adult family homes, we have a state amendment for the adult family homes that we also have to meet for adult family homes. That's in our WAC.
As far
Keep
as any
that.
of the new definitions here, is there any significant changes you see in this chapter?
No, there's no.
Okay.
Substantial damage and substantial improvement is the same. There's no significant changes.
So adult family home would go in here somewhere. Keep it. Substantial damage would come in later.
Yeah, we should adopt what our state has. So
And does it matter? Does substantial damage replace substantial structural damage, or is it in addition to?
it's in addition to substantial damage is up at the top.
Oh, I'm sorry. Missed it.
Yeah, I thought we had something in there. Everything else is correct and keep. I thought we had some kind of substantial damage, and there's also substantial improvements. Those are the two. Recommend just keep the existing amendment as modified in our state.
All righty. Well, that brings us to the end of chapter 2. Any additional discussion on chapter 2 before moving forward with the motion? Not seeing anybody raising any hands or anything like that, so we're in a position to entertain a motion to move chapter 2 to our master document.
Moved, Lansdowne.
Second. Brett.
All righty. All those in favor of moving chapter 2 to our master document, please say aye.
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 Is there any opposition? All righty, that motion passes. And then that brings us to chapter 3.
And the only thing on that, on chapter 3 that is new, is we have uniform plumbing code. We just have to make in our state amendments, we have in there, instead of IPC, we write UPC. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and then so that was kind of the things in there, and then we have LULAs. Basically, the model code is adopted what we've used for LULAs, so and platform homes.
Okay, 303 or 306.6, 306.71 and 78. Okay. So is the recommendation to keep all of the state amendments, or we can get rid of the Lula one?
Yeah, keep the existing amendments,
Okay.
especially for the Lula. As you see here, is keep existing amendments as modified. When I write keep, that just says keep the existing
Right.
amendments.
Okay.
And sorry about that.
All right. Okay, so 7, so that's all the state amendments in here. Nothing on the significant changes report. All right, with that one, that brings us to the end of chapter 3. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to chat on for chapter 3? Not seeing any hands or hearing any voices. So we're in a position to entertain the motion to move chapter 3 to our master document.
I make a motion to move it to our master document.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right.
The only thing, Justin, just to make sure, I mean, where they reference the IPC, we got to reference the UPC. That's the only
Right.
change.
That's in our state amendments, right?
Well,
Or do
no,
we need
that's, we have not adopted the International Plumbing Code.
Well, I know, but our state amendment for this section for the other codes, right?
Yeah.
Covers it, right?
Yeah, you just have to, where it says IPC, see where it says here, right there, International Plumbing Code, that just has to say Uniform Plumbing Code.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just want to make sure you just knew that because we haven't adopted the IPC.
Gotcha. All right. So we have a motion and a second to move this chapter to our master document. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there any in opposition? Hearing none, that motion carries. Moving to chapter 4 on this one. I think that I can't read that. Can anybody else? Okay, moving on to chapter 4 of the IEBC. First amendments are in 401.2 and 401.4, and looking for significant changes. We have a couple in here as well, so. All right, 401.2. I guess we'll go back to the first one. 401.2 model code language. Addition replaces the amendment language, repeal the existing state amendment. I agree with that one. Let me do something. Okay. 401.4 demolition and replacement says this WAC amendment requires compliance with building code provisions for new construction for buildings that are quotes effectively demolished and repaired, Even buildings with substantial structural damage as defined in chapter 2 are allowed to be repaired per section 405 structural. Therefore, this change would have increased costs for construction.
So Dustin, this is Trent. This is who wrote it. I guess my point is just that the IEBC prescribes the scope of repair based on the extent of damage, based on the definition of substantial structural damage. And even buildings that are completely destroyed are allowed to be repaired per the IEBC. So this amendment would say that it would take that right away and say that if a building was quote unquote effectively demolished, you had to follow code requirements for new construction. And another point I had is that effectively demolished is not defined. So it just leaves a little bit of gray area on exactly what this is asking you to do.
That's my read on it. My read on it also, Trent. It seems like almost like, why do we even need this here? I don't quite get it.
So would the recommendation be to remove this amendment? Or I guess the recommendation is to modify the amendment here. And I guess if we're going to modify the amendment, we'll need a proposal on that one. So what's the rest of the group feel on this amendment? Is it still valid, or is it dated and needs to be removed?
Well, if you go through the International Building Code, they have defined like repairs, damage, you know, so you got to meet all of chapter 3 for all compliances right off the bat. Chapter 3 you have to meet. Okay. Then what it does is it kicks you in some of the other stuff. So in chapter 304, you still have to do an evaluation and all that stuff right off the bat. That's how the existing building code is written. And then what it starts talking to is what kind of compliances you have to meet. And so they do have demolition. I thought they had a thing called demolition. That's what I'm trying to find this. So it's like classification of work. There's you have chapter 6 and all that stuff. I thought this was so where you're seeing this is in the commentary or the ICC one on the right hand side where you say repairs for chapter 4. Chapter 4 is all repairs. Chapter 5 is prescriptive compliance method. And in there, they deal with additions. They deal with all this, you know, existing structure carrying gravity loads. It covers everything you need, all in chapter 5, which is the prescriptive compliance methods. If you don't do the prescriptives, then you got the different alterations and you still get those too. So I always thought this was a strange thing in there that we had in our state. Or are you saying we're just going to keep this for our state, right?
Well, if we're recommending a modification to it, we'll need a proposal to it.
Yeah, but I don't think, you know, when you replace it, right? We're not making a recommendation to replace this, right? Or are we?
I'm Justin. I'd be happy to change my recommendation to removing the amendment.
Okay.
So I think the IBC is clear enough about what the scope of repair is based on the extent of damage. So
yeah, it's been. I agree. This in the past, the international existing building code wasn't real clear of how to do it, and over all these cycles. And please, I mean, I'm in this code a lot, so in a lot of the buildings, and we've put in a lot of changes through WABO. Tim, you've been involved in some of these things. You know, I think we've gotten it. And the nice thing is, if you look at the reference standards, they give you to a lot of the requirements that are already you can meet in some of the other situations. So, but you know, you really have to. I wouldn't make any changes to 4 because that's a repair. Chapter 4 is all repair. You're repairing something. You know. So
I think it's very poorly worded where it mentions where the intended method of repair. So we're basing code on what someone's intent. what we think someone's intent is. It's just a little bizarre in my mind.
Yeah, the big issue that I see that's a problem is the flood hazard stuff. In the International Existing Building Code. I don't know if you looked at that. That's 401.3. That's the one when you're in a flood hazard area, that tells you now have to build wherever you do the remodel, you got to meet the flood hazard requirements. That's
Right,
a problem. That's one of the big issues that we're having in Tacoma. What do we do on this? Because
But it gives you specific, criteria how to define what is considered substantial damage. At least maybe I'm thinking of our ordinance does. Maybe it's different in our city, but it could be.
yeah, that's 401.3, the flood hazard area.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys said, oh, it's there. That's the one that has caused some of the biggest concerns as a flood hazard. I don't remember if the state did any changes on that. It was all driven by insurance. But Dustin, could you tell me if the International Existing Building Code did any changes on that one in the flood hazard? What I've found, it hasn't. So
I do not know.
Yeah.
That one.
So that's a concern we have when a damaged building, you see where it says demolition and replacement? And it says there, shall comply with the requirements of new construction of the International Building Code. And then that kicks you in your flood hazard zone because the flood hazard zone wasn't new. I mean, that's new in the code. We never had to worry about that, which means you have buildings that have to be constructed. Let's say let's say a damaged garage and you're in a flood hazard. You got to when you rebuild that, you got to build that above flood hazard. So you can have a garage up high for XYZ reasons and the house lower because it never was damaged. I mean, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Just so it's not a big deal. I think it's fine, but I just want to make sure that's the one that, if anything was going to be changed, is that flood hazard thing. So when you get to substantial
question, 401.3 did not change in 2024.
No, it didn't.
So as for the 401.4, if we were to remove it, my only caution here again would be that it's not something that the new code addresses. And when we start removing them without necessarily looking at the reason statements as to why it's there and, the work and effort that it took to get it in the code, it's that fine line of where we go. 401.2 and 405.1, obviously, the new code captured that language. That makes sense for us to eliminate those amendments. But this one, the new code does not capture it. And though I'm not a big fan of it, I as with most of the discussion, it really doesn't do anything because obviously if there's only one wall standing, it's more than a substantial repair anyway. So I think the technical requirements get triggered, but again, it is language that is clarifying, and somebody went through the effort to get it in the code, and the new code does not have it. So we should take that into consideration.
Yeah, but the other thing, demolition, right? I mean, do you enforce demolition? I mean, we don't. We just make sure they put it in the right place.
Well, and again, I don't think this really carries much weight with anything because obviously, if you demolish a building, leave the foundation, you're in that area of code that is more than substantial repair anyway. So current code is going to be triggered regardless. So that's why I say I don't think the amendment has all that much value. And, from a personal standpoint, I'd see no harm in it going away. But I just want to caution everybody, when we do that, we need to look at history.
Yeah, Dustin, will you be able to find that out to see what the history, why we put that in there?
I can
Go back and see why.
I can definitely get into there and see when this one popped on our books and get the rationale.
Because already, I know all the projects that we've done in this, when they demolition and replace something, they build it to the new construction, period. It's never not. And if they use the existing foundation, they has to be approved by the building official, which means they gotta run the analysis to show that it works. I mean,
Correct, and that's because the code does it's got the sections, let's see, well, 405.2.1 repairs for less than substantial structural damage. That's when things can be restored to their pre-damage condition.
that's correct.
Essentially anything that's substantial structural damage or above, so to speak, has to comply with the current code anyway. And that's why I say it really does, the amendment doesn't have much real effect on the code, because it's what it's doing is it's kind of adding a redundancy and a clarification, but it doesn't change anything, because if you're demolishing and replacing, well, you have to build the new code anyway.
Well,
because of other parts of the code.
This WAC amendment, it's poorly written. So the first sentence, where a building or structure is effectively demolished by damage. How you define effectively demolished
Exactly.
might be, okay, the roof caught fire, so all the trusses are gone. In my opinion, it would be the entire structure down to the foundation. So there's that difference there. There's no definition for effectively demolished anywhere.
Correct, but there is definition for substantial structural damage.
That's correct. That's why I think that's why I think the 401.4.
Oh, no doubt, it is poorly written, and it's unnecessary. I'm just throwing the caution flag out there just for because it's not addressed in the code, so therefore it should at least get.
Well, it's worth trying to find out why it was modified, but to me, it doesn't add clarity. It almost makes it worse.
Yeah, me too. I think it makes it worse. Yeah.
I'm certainly not going to argue the merits of the amendment. So as far as this one goes, before we make a decision on a recommendation to repeal, modify, keep, we need to see the rationale on the existing amendment to kind of color what our thinking is on that.
Yeah, to figure out, because I think now, I wonder if this has just been carried over when we first went into the international existing building code, because this was a problem back, what is it, 2003. It wasn't real clear how that all worked, or whenever we got to the IEBC. We skipped the 2001, but yeah, it could have just been something they're just keeping up, kept over, and now we don't need to really need it anymore.
Okay.
Apologies, I have to step out for another meeting. And I have to leave.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Yeah, same here, Dustin. This is Brett.
I was gonna say I also have a hard stop at 4, and since we didn't get too deep into chapter 4, I would recommend that we table this for the next meeting on Thursday, and that'll give me a chance to check the rationale of this particular amendment, and I can come back with that on Thursday as well.
Thank you, Dustin.
Yeah, actually, Dustin, just to give you a little direction, it looks like that was a new amendment in the 21. I don't see that amendment in 18.
Okay.
So shouldn't have to dig deep.
I'm glad on that one. All right, so we have a motion to table the rest of the agenda till Thursday. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of tabling everything until Thursday, please say aye.
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 Alrighty. Any in opposition? Hearing none, seeing none, that motion passes. And is there any additional business to discuss real quick? Seeing no hands, I will call this meeting adjourned at 3:59.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, everybody.